The last thing I want to talk about in this video is working with gradients. Now, gradients in Illustrator, there's a couple of ways to do them. There's the gradient panel, which is over here in the panels, obviously, and then the gradient tool, which is over here in the tools. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just make a, well, actually, let's make that a rectangle. And I'm going to go over to my gradient panel, and the first thing I need to do is choose what type of gradient I want to use. So there's two main types of gradient. There's a linear gradient that runs in a straight line. Now, it doesn't have to go left or right like this. I can change that, and I'll show you that in a minute, but just understand that the gradient moves in a straight line from one place to another. Or a radial gradient, where it runs in a circle, has a central point and moves out in a circle. Let's work with the linear gradient first of all. So with the linear gradient, I'm going to come here and I can adjust the angle at which that gradient is going. I can type a number in there, or I can click on this and choose an angle, and you'll see so that can be up and down or side to side or diagonal, all sorts of ways that gradient can go. Now to change the colors of the gradient, this is obviously going white to black. Right here I've got this slider. On the very left I have a white box, that's the initial color. On the very right I have a black box. And up here in the top, I've got this diamond, and that diamond represents the central point of the colors. So at this point, it is right in the middle of white and black. Now, let me show you what I mean by that. If I take that slider and I move it to the right, you'll see that now that gray point happens much further on. There's a lot more white, and then it finally gets that central gray, and then quickly gets to black. Go the other direction, a lot more black, finally gets that central gray, then quickly moves to white. Okay. Now, if I click on that, I can type in where I want the location down here, or I can drag it. So if I want it right back to the very middle again, I'll just type 50% under location, and there it's right back to the middle. I can also drag these boxes. So right now it's saying that the white will happen at the very edge, and then it'll slowly turn to black, and the black will happen at the very other edge. Well, I could slide this over and say I want the white to continue all the way till about 1/4 of the way through, and then start going to black. Or I can say, and I want the black to go to about 1/4 of the way through, and then start going to white. So you'll see now I've got about 1/4 pure white, 1/4 pure black, and then a quick gradient between the two of them. So a lot of control that I have there in the steps of the gradient. Now, to change this color, all I need to do is double click on the box. So I'm just going to double click that white box, and I get this, it's basically, there's the color, the color panel, and there's the swatches panel. So I'm going to go to the color panel. I'm going to come up and click on the menu and say that I want to be working with CMYK. And let's just go ahead and choose kind of a red for that end of it. And then I'm going to double click the black slider, and I'm going to say again the color panel, go to CMYK, and say I want you, let's just go to the, well, actually I got rid of that swatch. Let's go here, say we want it to be a nice yellow on the other end. And I'm going to flip this, or now that's a good position. So now I've got it going from a red to a yellow. Another thing that I can do with my gradients is I can add in additional stop boxes. So by clicking underneath this slider at any point, I can add in another box. So now you see I've got red, I've got the orange that happens there, and I've got the yellow on the other end, and each one has the diamond above it for the central point. So now I can fine-tune where this orange happens. And I can get this gradient just exactly the way that I want it to be. Now the gradient probably looks pretty bad coming through the recording because it's being compressed, but it actually is very smooth on my screen. A last thing I can do, I can adjust the opacity of the gradient. So if I want to be able to see through the top part of it, I can just click on that box and set the opacity down lower. 100% opacity is completely solid, 0% opacity is completely see-through, and everything in between. And we'll talk more about opacity in a later video. So that is the linear gradients with the gradient panel. Now if I go to my gradient tool, you'll see that it puts a line here in the middle, and it's basically giving me the same options that I had in the gradient panel right on this line. There's my yellow box, there's the orange one I created, and there's the red one at the end. And I can click and say I want it to start here and extend all the way to here. And now you'll see that it starts with the red there, slowly goes to the yellow there. Or I can go off the edge of that shape. I want to start all the way out here and end all the way out here. and you'll see that I get a very mild gradient of orange through there. The red and the yellow never actually even show up because they're off the sides of my shape. Okay, so that's the gradient tool. Now let's just say that I wanted to do a radial gradient instead. I'm going to come here, go back to my gradient panel, change this to a radial gradient. And now I've got the same sort of choices. I can decide the angle of it. I can do my sliders. A new choice I have is height to width ratio. So right now it's 100%, meaning it's a perfect circle. But I could set this to say 200%, and now it's twice as tall as it is wide, or 50%, twice as wide as it is tall. And again, using the not 10%, we want to go to 100%. Using the gradient tool, I can choose where the center is, drag it out how far I want it to go, and get a nice gradient there. Here, I can decide if I want it perfectly circular or not. And here, I can adjust on the actual size of it or the rotation.